All right. So talk to me about this. Like, I like this observation of we study zero sum games and because they're so optimized, like every player at a very top level, like they're winning by fractions of a percent. They're taking edge wherever they can. I see you as one of those people, at least from the outside. Like I see you, for lack of a better word, optimizing life. Like I know that you are a person who measures like every minute of your life and has for a long time. And is just sort of like always working with high intention towards something. And I think there's no amount of unpacking that's not it's not interesting. So I'd love to dive into like how you started that, how you manage it, like what do you get out of it, why do you do it? That sort of like maximum intention quantification sort of mindset is really interesting.
Yeah, and the tech we're using to record just dropped. So if there was a discontinuity for the listeners, that's why. So just stepping back for like 5 seconds, right? I mentioned that, I'm not necessarily an aficionado for military history, especially, right? It's just that that's a field where there's, fairly objective winners and losers of conflicts, along with professional sports, right? Along with finance, when people are in the same markets, there's some people that get alpha and outperform the markets year and year and year and year, right? Like Dalio at Bridgewater or Peter Lynch at Fidelity Magellan. And then also games are a place that increasingly you can learn about this, like pro level StarCraft players. Obviously, there's poker as well. And your observation that I had never caught was you said, hey, these are zero sum games, largely. Maybe there's some positive externalities, but they're largely zero sum games. It's very interesting. Well, I think in business, or if you're building a social organization like a nonprofit or a university, you're actually not going to win by optimizing around the edges, right? You're going to get 1, 2, 3 core advantages that are very, very, very special, right? And that's where your success is going to come from. There are fields where people get in and they win through ruthless optimization, right? There's some people do that in real estate. You can do that, in a lot of very commodity-based fields of just like ruthlessly eliminating costs and optimizing everything operationally.
Retail.
Yeah, retail, I presume, is the same way. I don't really know much about retail, but yeah, it sounds like it's probably that. Like Walmart, I do know Walmart really focused on the turnover of their shelf space super aggressively, and they built logistics systems and predictive systems and whatnot. So, when you're doing business, it's not the ruthless optimizations that are going to get you there. I do it largely because I like it, and it's also like the field that I'm in benefits from that. So it also helps with product development, and helps with connecting with people, and so it's like what my field is. Do you know what I mean? Like, David Perel on your show, he's a writer, so when he does research on better writing and aesthetics and stylistics and poetics, it isn't just for his own enjoyment or a side thing. It makes him better at what he does, right? So for me, the ruthless optimization stuff, I don't know why I keep calling it ruthless. Talk about zero sum games. I gotta go. The very intensive optimization stuff helps, but I don't think that's what people need in the beginning. If you're going into business, you really want to find the core of something that's really special and get the theory behind that. And you really want to figure out who you're going to serve and how to do a really good job, and ideally a really special job in doing that. And then optimizing around the edges can make a big difference. For sure. But yes, I optimized like crazy. I get a big kick out of it, so I'm not necessarily recommending it. I feel like a lot of people take their own hobbies and interests and they recommend it fanatically to everyone. But yeah, you're right. For about 2 years in a row, I tracked down to the 5-minute block every single day. And I could tell you, if you want to know what I was doing in 2018 on May 13th at 3:13 p.m., I could go dig out my old records and tell you. And I could tell you what my stats were that week of how much time I put into different categories and whatnot. And I learned a heck of a lot from doing it. If people say they don't have time, the first time I started doing time tracking, let's make it real grounded, not so abstract. First time I started doing time tracking, I chose what my MIW, most important work, was. I picked something. And a week later, I felt like I was busy all week. I was doing a lot of stuff. It's the first time I ever did this. A week later, I'd only put in about 4.5 hours on what I had defined as my most important. And I said it was my most important. And nobody, I didn't have a gun in my head. A hurricane didn't hit my city that week. There was no real good reason why I wasn't doing this. That was 1 3-hour session. And then 30 minutes here and there, maybe an hour once and 30 minutes once, something along those lines. Right. And I'm like, well, okay, no, not surprising. that the big things aren't moving when you only put 4.5 hours into them, right? So if you put 4.5 hours in your most important work in the morning on the first day of the week, and then after a little lunch and a little admin, you do it again, you know what I mean? You could see that it's very possible to have double the throughput in one day that people that normally work at that pace do in 1 week. And I think we've all like experienced this when like, you know, college term papers due like the next day and suddenly you become like the Tasmanian devil and you do it all in one day. You know, in theory, I'm just throwing this out there. In theory, you could do that the day after the paper got assigned. This was a haunting idea to me. I want to say this again. Everyone's like, that's a cute idea. No, I'm serious. In theory, you could Tasmanian devil your way through something, just like you would when the final deadline's coming, and you could emulate all the conditions. You could put yourself into a high-stress state. You could get a bunch of Red Bull. Whatever you do when you're on the wire, you could, in theory, do on any given Tuesday and get a bunch of stuff done, right? You could do it. And so that was very intriguing to me. So I started trying to do that. And then sometimes I would, and it was great, and I really enjoyed it. Now, you don't want to do that all the time. You could kind of burn yourself out. But, you know, optimizing around the edges is great. But I mean, like, you know, when I first started tracking it, I thought, like, oh, maybe I'll, you know, automate my email down 3 minutes or whatever. And I'm like, yo, there's like 168 hours a week. I only put 4 of them into the thing that I wanted to do. Like, it's like, you know, you don't need to be an astrophysicist to figure out how to improve the system a little bit, you know?
Yeah, like that is I feel like there's an interesting conversation to have with you about productivity, because I tend to check out of most productivity conversations. Like I wonder actually if you have a more nuanced way to describe what you do than just productivity.
Yeah.
Like what is like that hobby or that optimization?
Yeah,
like
the problem with the word productivity, which we try to kind of avoid when we can. The problem with it is there's just been a lot of overpromising and under-delivering, especially in high tech and information technology, you know. So, you know, like Slack is like where work happens. It's like, no, it's not. That's their motto. And it's like, no, it's not. It's like a really elegant chat. That's valuable. Like your communications are going to be more enjoyable, more pleasant. You know, it's more smooth, it's more modern. There's integrations. That's really nice. It's not where work happens. It's chat app. You know, Evernote similarly had some, you know, your place for all your work. It's like, no, it's not. It's a note-taking app. It's a place to write down scratch some notes out. You know, in the day, it was first class at what it did, really good syncing, right? So you get all these companies that do one kind of narrow function, you know, and do a good job on it, and then they overpromise that they're the total productivity. So people kind of start to tune out on it, you know, and they kind of zoom out. And like I was saying earlier, you know, a lot of the people that ruthlessly track and optimize really just do it out of a personal interest. And so then you take a look at them, and they're like people that do it as a hobby and do it as a theory, and that's how I started doing it. And I'm not claiming it's the greatest thing ever for everyone. So you need a core of something like really, really special. You need to be like really, really good with people. You need to understand people. You need to understand psychology, and you need to hone your own judgment and your wisdom and stuff like that if you want to be successful. Then as for productivity, I think the other thing too is there's an anti-signaling effect. There's like the people that are searching for productivity are people that are unproductive, right? So somebody goes into Google and types in, how do I be productive, right? People go into Google and they type in, how do I be productive, right? And they're not being productive. So the way to monetize and to sell to that and to get Google AdWords and put them to a landing page and sell is like, are you feeling like a freaking loser that blah, 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 and you're not productive and blah, 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 blah. So when you Google it, all the Google search results on productivity are polluted. You know, what you should be having come up when you search productivity, if it was like not based on the links thing and the SEO and the page rank, if it was based on actually the real shit, pardon my language. We're swearing on the podcast? We're swearing a little bit?
We're swearing on this podcast.
Right, yeah. Well, so it's like, if the real shit is like, you should pull up Richard Hamming, you know, like you and your research, if it's like a young person, which is like just a beautiful, beautiful essay, you know, from the guy that was at Bell Labs where they invented like half of modern computing. Do you know what I mean? Like Richard Feynman should come up when you search for productivity. You know, I don't like Pablo Picasso, but a little bit about Pablo Picasso. The dude was prolific. He did thousands and thousands of pieces. It's not my cup of tea, but he was very productive. Da Vinci, how he really deeply studied anatomy and whatnot, or, you know, things about, you know, how the San Antonio Spurs front office works, or how Bill Belichick does it in football, and you know, breakdowns around that. But what typically comes up in the AdWords and you know, the SEO and whatnot is garbage that is like, it's not your fault. here's what you need to do. Start by, and it's like garbage.
Buying this SaaS app.
Yeah, exactly. It's garbage, or a course or a book or whatever. And it's garbage. And what we try to do is we try to create edge for really top performers in really demanding fields, for people that are very analytical and ambitious. And we're not remedial at all. We're like not trying to fix you. Like if you're really good, we're wanting to make you better, So, we got Headquarters, our desktop app that's got some really good tools in it and some interfaces for getting a lot of work done. And like, we can fully, if you're in the United States or Canada, we can fully automate your nutrition, where like hot meals will just show up at your door with the exact macro micronutrient mix you want for like, if you're lifting weights, we'll give you more protein and more carbs on the days you lift, time to that, and then we'll put you on a deficit if you want to cycle the calories on non-lifting days to recomposition. And then we build stuff like, like work cycles and the pentathlon and stuff like that. And those are all for people that are already performing at a pretty high level. Now, there are some fundamentals, and I'm empathetic to the fact that sometimes people need to get the fundamentals, and like, we're happy to do that, but that's like not our, that's not like what we're doing in business. We say peak performance to kind of skirt around the productivity word, cognitive and affective, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I'm still looking for a great word. If you get a better word for it than me, I'm all ears. I'll send a little bonus your way or something if you can get some better word than productivity for us.
Yeah, I think that's like productivity always struck me as painful, just because I always frame my efforts towards this as like leverage is one of the main mental models that I go back to, because it's about increasing impact, not about squeezing the last drop out of the fruit when the fruit is you. Like, that's what productivity feels like to me, is kind of like, how do I flog myself and like extract the most possible from myself? And I'm like, it sounds badass sometimes. Like, you want to believe that you can do that and operate at your limit or whatever. It's fun. Yeah. But it's also like, you don't want to actually live that way most of the time. At least most people don't. So how do you, and I think like actually Ultraworking does a very good job of introducing a bunch of this sort of mindset. Is like, it's really about increasing your impact and your output. And there's a bunch of creative ways to do that are not just squeezing yourself harder and pushing yourself harder and working another hour.
Yeah. So by the way, I would make a distinction there on the squeeze every drop out of the fruit. First off, I think anyone that wants to be a top performer. So first off, we need to make a distinction between people that want to be top performers and people that like want to have like reasonably balanced lives. Right away, if somebody's listening, maybe there's some young people that aren't sure, that could go either way. But there's like some people that are like, I want to be the best in my field, or I want to be really exceptional and outperforming. You know what I mean? There's people that genuinely aspire to the U.S. presidency and are building the connections and participating in party politics and stuff to try to get elected assembly person, and then they're going to make a run at governor, and then they're going to make a run at president. And they genuinely want to, and they're going to need to sell out everything they have to get there. They're going to, because other people are, right? So those extremely competitive, we were talking about zero-sum games earlier. So you need to ask yourself whether you want to be that person or not. But if you don't, but you're moderately ambitious, I do think going all in for a week or two occasionally is really good. My friend Nick Winter runs a tech company out in San Francisco. He used to do these things called Maniac Weeks, where he optimized everything away, got all his food lined up, and talked with his wife in advance, got a standing desk and everything to see how many hours is the most he could program in a week. And he would like pre-set up all the problems he's going to work on in programming. And he would put in like 100, 120, 130 hours or something in a week just to see if he could do it. And then like he'd be smoked the next week. And so like his net productivity across those 2 weeks would be not great. Maybe good, but not outstanding, right? But that shows you the top end of what you're capable of, and it like kind of lets you take a watermark of what you can do if you need to in a crisis in a week. I think that's cool, and I think everybody should consider doing that. Now, whatever, if somebody has like a mental health challenge or health challenge, or they have a family and then the family's not accommodating, or there's like don't be stupid. Like I'm very against being stupid, you know what I mean? But like if you're a young person, you're really like quite healthy, you got a support network and stuff. I think it's really cool to do this from time to time, and sometimes I do this for a week to a month, and it's great. You just feel really great doing it. But you're right. In the big picture, yeah. I think there are different elements to it. I think everybody learns eventually that like systems and people eventually become more important than your individual productivity. I think I learned this pretty early on. When you're managing people, when you're a boss, you can like, I killed it this week, and you did all this stuff, and then you take a look at one of your staff's work, and they didn't do anything that week, and maybe they finished some stuff on Wednesday and you didn't give them anything new to do, and they didn't ask, and they did nothing for 3 days, and it was like, man, like if I could have stepped back and been paying a little more attention, for half an hour or an hour, this lady over here, she wanted to do great work. She's like great at it. And she wanted to do something, but she didn't know what to do. So she just did whatever for a few days. You kind of start to learn that lesson. Systems are really important. One thing that might be interesting, probably would be interesting to you. Do you know Zach Cantor, who runs Steady?
Yeah. I'm hoping to have him on the podcast too. I think he's really quite clever about a lot of these ideas too. Yeah.
He's a genius. Did you see the recent excerpt from the Steady annual letter to investors?
No.
Okay, so Steady, STEDI letter. He was talking about operational excellence, and one aspect of operational excellence that they focus on is reducing toil, and they use like the Google SRE definition of toil. And I could pull this up if we want. I'm a little bit gun shy about using my browser now when we're recording here, but yeah, let's see here. Toil, from the Google SRE book definition, the kind of work tied to running a production service that tends to be manual, repetitive, automatable, tactical, devoid of enduring value, and that scales linearly as a service grows. So aggressive elimination of toil is a great idea. Is a great idea.
And that seems like it fits with your. You wrote quite a bit about the Toyota production system. It fits at their kind of category of like non-value producing work.
Yeah, they had 3 categories: value producing work, which they're extremely strict about. Right, that's like literally screwing the tire onto the car. It's like literally direct customer production work. Non-value producing work, which they actually refer to as stuff like payroll, and security and stuff like that, right? And then waste. And waste is everything else, right? And so actually, they're really hardcore about it. They classify any movement of parts or materials as waste. So if you got to get up from your workstation, walk 5 feet to pick up a tool and walk back, they consider that 5 feet of walking waste. So, really optimizing your environment so that that's minimized, so that all because going and getting a tool is actually not creating value. It's like a necessary step, but if the tool is already in the right spot, then there you go. So getting rid of stuff like that and optimizing that's a great idea to optimize on a systems level, where you're not squeezing every drop of juice out of yourself, but you're making your job and your team's job easier over time.
Yeah, reducing toil, reducing waste, eliminating or reducing non-value producing work. Is going back to your, or I guess to tie this into your kind of experiment around extreme measurement. Do you feel like going through those, whether it's a maniac week or a 2 years of measuring your time, do you find that you have a new higher sort of baseline of productivity or awareness or something coming out of one of those things?
Good question.
Where do they accumulate long term versus just sort of that was an interesting experiment, but I'm pretty much where I started?
I mean, so there's two kind of confounding factors. One is that COVID hit, which destroyed my beautiful circuit. I had the most beautiful setup with my gym and my swimming pool and the co-working space that a section of it was ours, and the healthy food restaurant and stuff. So COVID just absolutely wrecked it up. So immediately after the sample was the COVID era, where socializing and travel and stuff was gone. So there's that. So it's really quite hard to say, because I used to how people play multiple chess games at the same time. The grandmasters will play on 5 boards. I used to sometimes do synchronous meetings. So if you have junior team members, give somebody 20 minutes of work to do, right? To if they're learning a problem, give them 20 minutes of work to do, go check in with someone for 10 minutes, somebody else for 10 minutes, give them 20 minutes of stuff, check in the next person for 10 minutes. So it's reps. You can have a rolling meeting. Oh, it was so much fun. It was so much fun. And if you set it up correctly, and it's not it was there's probably, if you imagine it, there's a really rude, horrible way, and there's a cool, fun way. It's the cool, fun way if anyone's having a hard time imagining. It was fun. It was, and it's not it's not stations. It's we're all posted up in a big. There's a co-working space that one of the rooms tend to be pretty empty, and it was big and luxurious. And I would just kind of cycle through, and I'd be hey, I'm gonna check in with you for 10 minutes, and then I'll see you in 20 more. So we're gonna start every 30 minutes, and then I'm gonna check in with you for 2 to 7 minutes, give you feedback on your work. You could jam a little bit, and then I'll be back. And so I would just kind of circle through. So those types of things went away. And we started to have to get on more remote work norms and build remote work systems, and it's a bit of a different game. The other thing is it's very hard to calibrate, as a CEO. It's very hard to calibrate because your job's always changing. So like, am I doing a good job at my job? Like the minute that you do a really, really good job at something, you tend to establish a new baseline, new capabilities, new product, new team members, new ops. And then it's interesting. It's the paradox of being a CEO is when you do a really, really, really bang up job, then you've immediately put yourself into I'm onto a new thing with new capabilities that I'm at 0% on and maybe bad at. You cause new problems with success. You really grow over on one side, which creates scaling problems. On this other side, now you need to hire for a role you don't know as much, and so on and so forth. So the CEO, there's a bit of a thing that doesn't apply to everybody else, which is when you do a really good job, typically your job changes, or can change. And then obviously the macro conditions. I think sometimes people are a little too sensitive to those in small companies. Like, oh, the economy's down. It's like, it usually doesn't matter that much, but it does matter a little bit. And sometimes if you're in a field, it might matter a lot if you're in like a travel related field or something and COVID hits, right? But yeah, so the landscape's always changing. Consumer preferences are always changing. I think this is the first time I've talked about this publicly. I think there's going to be a big shift sometime in the next 1 to 2 years. I actually don't know what it is, but I think we're in a very unstable equilibrium right now societally around like consumption and demand and how people relate to organizations and employment. I think something's going to change. I don't know. It's like a vague thought. I don't have like a big. I'm not like being a pundit on TV that's like making like a unfalsifiable prediction. I'm just talking about a sense that I have. I'm not, but I think there's going to be a pretty big shift in some way. I'm seeing, this is one of the nice things about studying history is you eventually start to get a sense of like when the conditions are right for shifts. Do you know what I mean? And I'm seeing a number of factors that would seem to indicate that there could be, just to riff on this for a second more. I've been exploring this and it's not super well honed, but like, how do I put this? People tend not to investigate and reevaluate and tend not to be open to certain types of new and different ways of doing things when things are like pretty good or going up. And when things get a little bit bad and it seems temporary, like COVID, people are just holding out for things to get back. I think now in 2022, people aren't looking at like, I want the world to be like it was in 2018. They're kind of like, I feel like a lot of the general public, which, I feel like probably a lot of listeners of the show that are in business are probably insulated from a lot of the problems normal people have. We're very, very fortunate in many ways that we have a lot of control over our lives and resources and whatnot. So, maybe people aren't noticing it, but I think a lot of people in the general public are like hurting pretty hard right now. And I think it's kind of crossed over in the general public into almost like despair. The anti-Muslim author got stabbed. You hear about this, Salman Rushdie?
Mm-hmm.
Like he got stabbed, but here's he got stabbed on stage. It was like a horrible thing. But here's the thing: it was such a muted reply to it. It was just kind of like a depressed, oh man, this is like a insult to freedom of speech. Like it wasn't like it was, like when the shooting happened in Paris, the Charlie Hebdo thing. There was like people out in the streets. It was like a big thing. Everyone's like, we're going to defend our thing. Such a muted reaction to such a horrible event. So I think probably the general public is in one of those things. And I would really not be surprised if sometime in the next 2 years, something kind of catches wildfire. I think probably people are going to want very intense experiences that don't feel threatening or scary or difficult or expensive to opt into, right? And I don't know if we'll see political upheaval or not. I'm actually thinking maybe not political, but more social. And I don't know what that looks like. That might be like, somebody going to like dig like they're like, oh, there's garbage. We're going to clean up the garbage. And one person just says, I'm going to go clean up the garbage. And then like a bunch of people come out and then like suddenly everybody in the whole city is cleaning up the garbage. And it's like the big, everyone cleans up the garbage in America movement. I don't know that kind of thing. It's probably not that, but anyways, I'm digressing a little bit, but you asked me about your own performance. It's hard to measure. It's hard to calibrate because the world's always changing. Yeah. And as a CEO, your job's always changing. And I think we live in really, really weird times that are going to be really, really weird. So I'm trying to get a bead on where the world's going to go and anticipate it so that we're like ahead of the curve, not behind the curve and getting caught flat-footed. That's why I digressed into that subject, is because that's how I'm thinking about my performance lately.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's. I think that other people are making that same observation. I mean, as I'm working on the book about biology, he observes a period of unrest due to some of the same sort of historical factors. I think that that you and he have seen, like looking at the long arcs of history. I'm curious. You had a great quote in a different podcast I was listening to you on that pertains to this sort of like, where is your limit? How do you know? Like, how fun is it to push yourself? When most people, when they think they're giving 100%, are only giving 40 to 60% of their max effort. That's why we say stuff like give 110% to just try to get people over the over the like mediocrity. So I think that's one. I think that's an interesting idea. It's almost seems to me the core of ultraworking and like what really excites you about it. But I'm also curious now. It's so much easier to imagine that as an individual contributor than as a CEO, and I wonder what it's like as somebody who loves to try to give 100%. How do you do that as a CEO? Like, is that, and how different does it feel from when you were just starting this company out?
Yeah, the quote that you're referring to is not my own. That was from Stan Beecham, who wrote a pretty good book. It's not my favorite book in the space. It's okay. If you've already read everything else, you can read it. But there's other books that I'd read first called Elite Minds. And he coached top-level athletes, Olympic athletes. And, I believe the example that he used is he would ask people, hey, if you just started jogging at a very slow pace, right? Like, and you're going to get a little bit of water and snacks handed to you while you jog, right? How long could you go, right? And then someone's like, I don't know, 3 hours, 4 hours. And he's like, actually, you could jog for like 3 days straight or something like that. Oh. You know what I mean? Something crazy. Yeah. You know what I mean? Now, you wouldn't want to. You'd be in bad shape at the end of it, right? So He said that, what most people feel like is 100% is 40, 60, whatever, right? And so you feel like you're dying when you go above that limit. Your body starts to like break apart and howl at you, right? And what Beecham said is to be an Olympic athlete, you have to have certain prerequisites of like if you want to be a real competitor at the Olympics, you need to have a swimmer's type body. If you're swimming, you need to be sufficiently tall if you're playing basketball and so on, right? But assuming you've met those prerequisites, if you can give 80% of your theoretical maximum, right? And target doing that basically every single day with appropriate rest days, and you'll screw it up 3 or 4 times a month. It's also okay to screw it up and have a bad day 3 or 4 times a month. So if you're hitting 80% of your training ability, 26 times a month, that's Olympic level performance. And 100% is like, I'm forgetting if this is exactly how Beecham put it, but like 100% is like you die. Like, right? So you don't want to give 100%. 100% is, there's no 110. 100% is like your cellular whatever disintegrated and you're dead, right? So there's a model that I think is really, really useful. Kai Zhao, who founded Ultraworking with me, he's since moved on, but still really, really good friends. Kai Zhao and I put together a model. We were really discussing and arguing about this topic extensively. There's a difference between what we call the MSP and the MPP, the maximum sustainable pace and the maximum possible pace. And it's really, really worthwhile to know which one of those you're going for when you're going for maximum. So maximum sustainable, max possible is what I talked about with Nick Winter, Maniac Week. Max possible is, I unfortunately, it was not lined up this way, but I unfortunately had to have a 21-hour in a row day, and the only break that I had was having a yoga, and I was taking meals while on calls and such like that. So I had one of those days where I had to work 21 hours straight. Like, it sucked. Screwed me up a little bit. It was just one of those days where like that was called for. You can do that. You shouldn't do that, right? So that's possible. It's absolutely possible. So I think sometimes people don't draw a distinction between max sustainable and max possible, and and then there's also different strategies. Sometimes people will try to get everybody going in the same direction for like a max possible or approaching max possible sprint for a short period of time, like when a product release is coming out, or sometimes it just really is the case that your company exhibits at a trade show and there's a ton of opportunities and you want to run at the max possible pace for 2 to 3 weeks afterwards to follow up and capitalize on all the gains, followed by some sort of rest period and recovery period. So so there's a big difference between going for max possible pace and having those tools in the toolbox when they're called for, when you're doing when you're in a window of opportunity or in a crisis where really extremely maximum performance is called for, or trying to set up max sustainable pace where you got your yoga and you got your morning routine and you got your healthy diet and you got your meal system dialed in. You got your bed with the blackout curtains and all that jazz. So I think that's a useful distinction. I sometimes try to run at the max sustainable pace and sometimes try to run at the max possible pace, and I try to be clear on which one I'm doing in any given week. As you get more senior and have more team and more systems, increasingly the job of an executive is about having good judgment, right? So that's really tricky and it's really nebulous. It's about having good judgment, not about, as you said, individual contributor sitting down or whatever. And how do you know you're having good judgment? It's like, well, things are going in the direction you want. The predictions you're making are happening or being outperformed. People seem to be happy and the wins are coming. It's quite difficult. It's quite difficult to evaluate performance, like, did the CEO of Delta Airlines do a good job during the pandemic? Like, who knows? Obviously, they went down, but they were going to go down. Do you know what I mean? Did they go down as little as possible? Is the question. You know? So, very tricky. Yeah,
that's. We joked earlier when we were like getting started about optimizing for fun, and I think that's both a joke and a reality, and something that as you shift from kind of like hardcore individual contributor mode to just being in like a different chapter of life or a slightly more comfortable place or trying to set up a family or whatever, like these transitions that I think a lot of the, and I was certainly here, I imagine you are too, of like the very hard charging, ambitious, like max sustainable pace almost all the time, kind of 20 something goes into like, oh, I actually don't have to sprint to survive anymore. But I also have been sprinting long enough that I kind of have a hard time not, like I have to almost work as hard to like build in the chill or the fun or the like, I have to structure the unstructured time. Is that something you have gone through or will go through or don't think about at all yet? Like, do you chill? And if so, do you like, how do you set that up? Are you as structured about that as you are with the working stuff?
Yeah, I think it's really critical to know yourself and to know your personality. And I don't recommend what I do to anybody. I go crazy. I go crazy with pointless relaxation. Like, and I know that this bothers people. So I don't want to like ruin anyone's fun. Like I can make an appearance like at a party and be like really sociable and pleasant. And like I can come in and like give FaceTime and give respect to some people and come in and like have a good time for like 30, 40 minutes and then bounce. But I like to show up at like a party like early and help the host set up, or show up like right at the end and help them clean up. Like I like to be doing stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like just experiencing. I've learned the hard way, and I'm not. Sometimes I say this and people are like, oh, this guy's a jerk. He thinks he's better than people. No, not at all. It's just how I'm wired. I like to do things like, every now and then. So I like to play cooperative board games with people, but I like to play really hard cooperative board games where like the default is that you lose the game. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And like sometimes we'll go play, team shooter games, and I find people that want to play the same way, where we do like deliberate practice. So we'll put some rounds, some unranked rounds on, and we will just go and we'll like pick a point on the wall and try to like strafe and jump around and hit that point as much as we can to like practice aiming. It's amazing to me that people play video games and they don't like practice. With real life firearms and marksmanship, you go to the range and you practice, right? You can do this in shooter games. Do you know what I mean? And like you'll be better at them, and you can see the spread patterns on shotguns and like shoot them at the wall and stuff and like look at the targets. Then we work on like our verbal commands and our movement, and, like flanking people and stuff like that, and just the joy of doing something to the best of the possible ability and executing as well as possible and as good as possible. Ideally, this is productive activity most of the time that makes the world a better place or builds my life up. But yeah, I don't really like to chill, man. Like, I don't know. I'm weird. I'm wired weird. Like, I don't recommend it for other people.
Is there stuff
if you're not wired that way, don't try it.
Is there stuff that's not productive, I guess, like quote unquote, that you do that is like, recharges you?
Massages are really good, but I think they're productive. I don't know.
Is it that's value producing work, or it's not value producing work, but it's not waste.
Then a bazillion things. Then a bazillion things. Then a bazillion things. Right.
Yeah.
I think there's a whole class of stuff that's rejuvenating, or I think things that give you new inputs and more novelty. like inputs and novelty good. I love museums. I love going to look at art. I love reading. I love having, conversations like the conversation this is like a normal conversation that I have with people, a little more powerful podcast voice, but this is like a, like a normal conversation I'd have with somebody, right? This sort of stuff I really like.
Just more technical issues. Yeah.
Yeah. But just like, I don't know, like I remember when we were like kids in high school, we'd like hang out and like get a Dr. Pepper and like sit on the couch and just chill. And like, I don't know, that doesn't really do anything for me. Do you know what I mean? I like to have some stimulation and some novelty, and something to experience. And honestly, I just like doing things. Do you know what I mean? So like if somebody's like gardening, like going and gardening with them and seeing how that works, it's like really cool. You see how plants grow and stuff. You help them out. I don't know. That's the kind of stuff that I like doing stuff, but I'm wired weird. I also like to work 7 days a week. I get thrown off. If I don't work. If I don't do my morning routines and stuff, it screws me up. So even if I want to take days off, I put in like 1 to 3 hours in the morning and then take the rest of the day off. And that's typically what I do on vacation. I've tried to unplug. It screws me up. It's deleterious. It's like unhealthy for me. Do you know what I mean? I like the routine of waking up and starting the day strong, getting some stuff done and being calibrated, right? But not everyone's like that. Some people do way better on 6 days a week. Some people do better on 5. Some people, I presume, maybe do better on 4, even if you wanted to get throughput. Certainly throughput divided by time, maybe. Raw throughput, I don't know. But yeah, like I'm a 7 days a week kind of guy, but people need to know themselves. And that's a very personal exploration to figure out one's preferences and what works for you.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I realize this far into the conversation, I don't actually have a good sense of like where Ultraworking is as an organization. Can you, like, whatever you're comfortable with, giving us, scale of community size or team size or whatever, to kind of help me wrap my head around like what your day-to-day job actually is these days?
Yeah, sure. So, we've grown, 50% a year, the last couple of years. Actually, we did no marketing, so it's pretty cool. It was all word of mouth. It was about $40 million of revenue last year. And then for team, we are just going through a hiring cycle. So I think we're probably the target will be to be at, let's see, maybe 12 people. We're hanging right now 6, 7, 8 right now, depending on,
wow.
Some people that are kind of in part-time or whatever. And we're also exploring, so I'm actually headed out. This is my first time, or my second time during the pandemic traveling internationally. So I'm actually going to head over to the Philippines and Chris Natterer, who's an engineer on our team, who's in Europe. He's from Germany. He's going to come out there. And Andrea, who came on and started working with us, is out in the Philippines. And she's doing really well and doing really great. So I'll be able to link up in person. And this
Nice.
is like actually the first time we've been able to link up in person since the stupid pandemic started. So we're about to go get a big jam on there. The biggest thing we've been focusing on recently is we've been on a big operational excellence kick in a full disclosure sort of way. Almost all of our success came from breakthrough wins and inventing and like intense service focus, like obsession with the customer and intense service focus and occasional blockbuster wins. But we would do something that works really well, and then we would just do it erratically. We wouldn't like do it every month. Do you know what I mean? So there's like types of marketing, types of events, types of cool things that we would just do erratically. And we also were like very much like people could do whatever they want as long as it's on the mission sort of company. Seriously, we were very liberal.
Yeah.
And at some point you need to like also like just do everything you say you're going to do. So recently we've been building that. Actually, what we've been working on in August, which is really, really cool, we built an internal agreements tracker. Where anytime somebody says they're going to do something for anybody else, they write it down. There's a definition of done in there, what day they're going to do it by, who they're accountable to, right? And we're aiming for a 100% unbroken agreements rate. Unbroken doesn't mean shipped, because you could renegotiate. Things go long. But what happens is it can't be like the day of. You're like, oh no, it's not going to happen. You have to be like 2 days out. You have to be like, I'm going to renegotiate this. This project that we're doing is like not going to come. It's not going to come out on Friday. Do you know what I mean? It's Wednesday. It's not coming out on Friday, right? It's going to take at least another week. Do you know what I mean? And so market is renegotiated instead of just letting Friday pass, like, oh, we missed the target, right? So just proactively renegotiating commitments if they can't be shipped, otherwise hitting them all, never failing silently. And it took a lot of work to install this and a culture of this and having people detect when everyone's like, oh, yeah, I'm going to do that thing for you. Oh, shoot, I forgot. We're like not doing that anymore. So yeah, we're going for 100% unbroken agreements in August. We're halfway through August as of our recording date's August 15th. It's been a game changer, man. It's been so good. Then we're doing like areas of responsibility, like exactly what people's jobs are and the processes, and then be 100% unbroken on those. And then it's just, if everyone does exactly what they say they're going to do, and renegotiates when we estimate wrong and whatever, then it's your analysis and your target selection is how far you go, not execution risk, right? So we're getting really tight on execution operations, because if everyone does what they say they're going to do, right, and we've got the right resources, the right team and whatnot, right, then it's your analysis and your target selection that determines how far you go, not do you execute or not. So yeah, that's where we're at. It's been super exciting.
Yeah, I think Ultraworking's in a really interesting spot for the sort of big trends that are changing around both remote work and sort of increasing independence of work, people being their own contractors or setting up individual companies or being creators or whatever. Like, all of that is really, I feel like, will shuffle more people towards some of the tools and systems that you have set up. I started using Ultraworking when I was, at least a few of the tools, when I still had a day job, and I just didn't have, I didn't have some strict timetable like management that was giving me, or manager that was giving me like very clear like timetables and tasks and Gantt charts and stuff like that. So I just kind of went looking for a system that would let me do it for myself, and Ultraworking became that through like the monthly planning cycles. And I just really liked it and sort of went down the rabbit hole from there into a bunch of the other tools. So I use Headquarters like every week, if not every day. And I've been doing
awesome.
monthly planning for
that's the goal
almost
right
2
there.
years now, which is really cool.
I love it, man. Hey, I'm not paying you to say this. Thank you.
Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, sometimes my my to-do list is just put X number of cycles into Y project. Because for lack of a better, clear outcome, it's just like time in the saddle. I know sometimes that's the solution to certain sorts of problems or workloads. So I'm curious, actually. I know I've read most of Gateless. I think back when we originally wrote that, but you went through this chapter in your life where you just like were cranking out books, and you were like a writing machine. And I'm curious about that chapter in your life. Like, what did you learn or become or manifest or, unpack when you were kind of doing all that writing and all those books? What looked like, really pretty rapid
let's come back
succession.
to that. Let's come back to that, because I have a very useful short thing for people based on the thing you said about how you put time in the saddle. Really, really useful. Just like little phrases that are game changers for people. So when you're shipping a project, right? Basically what you just said is you put in a process-based target. Not, I'm going to make 3 sales, but I'm going to make 10 calls. I'm going to make 10 calls, I'm going to do them as good as I can, whatever. Or I'm going to put in half an hour. I'm going to edit this piece of creative writing I did for half an hour. And like, I'm not even necessarily going to ship it at the end, right? Process-based target versus outcome-based target. And knowing when to set one or the other is very key. That ties in with another thing about like what is good enough for a project. And this is a game changer for people, and I think a lot of times people don't know what they're doing in terms of this dichotomy: scope to time or scope to quality. Scope to time or scope to quality. Scope to time is, we're going to ship this feature on Friday. I don't care how good it is. We're putting something out on Friday. We have to put this out on Friday. And scope to quality is, we're going to put this out when it's sufficiently good and does these 3 things really well, right? So, you can look at some movie makers, some art makers, some video game makers. Some of them scope to time and some of them scope to quality, and you can kind of tell the difference, right? So, like the video game companies, Blizzard, right, and the movie studio Pixar, both scope to quality. Pixar had done almost all of Toy Story 2. It was like almost done. It was like 80% done. And they're like, this isn't good enough. So they like threw it away and redid it. You know what I mean? And because they were scoping to quality, right? Blizzard did a full game, first-person shooter based on StarCraft. They like never released it because it wasn't fun enough. And they'll like make a game take as long as it needs. And both Pixar and Blizzard will spend really a very long time on it. Whereas like Electronic Arts make the sports games, NFL game, NBA game. I don't know, I don't play them, but they make those. They come out every single year right before the season's going to start with the new player rosters, and it's like coming out no matter what on that day, right? So I think it's very, very useful for people to decide, are they scoping to time or are they scoping to quality? Are they going to put this feature out when it's perfect, or are they going to put this feature out on Friday? So paradoxically and counterintuitively, when you're scoping to quality, process-based targets of putting in time is very helpful. Paradoxically, when you're scoping to quality, I will put this out when it's done, then putting time in the saddle is usually the correct way to do it. If you're scoping to time, where I need to put this thing out, then you want to put the deliverables. Like, hey, it's Tuesday, we're putting the thing out on Friday. We need to put out 1/3 of it tomorrow, 1/3 of it on Thursday, and then finish it on Friday, right? So you need to scope to the outcomes, right, in a work session, right, to hit the time. When it's just quality, I'm going to put this out when it's excellent. That's when saying I'm going to put in 6 work cycles on this. I'm just going to put in
That's
4
interesting.
hours on this, whatever. Yeah.
That's definitely how I think about the books. I mean, I scope to quality is not a phrase I had used, but I thought of it like, craftsmanship comes from ample time. Like it totally like time is irrelevant. It takes the time that it takes to reach a certain level of quality of excellence, especially for things that you publish, like a book that just basically live on forever in their shipped state of quality. It's very different than, a course or a piece of software or something like that. But yeah, that's I think that's awesome. And I definitely shift even in sub projects sort of between scope to time or scope to quality. But when it is helpful to have those chunks of time and know, especially if it's a really big scope to quality project, that you can watch yourself like make progress through numbers of hours and give yourself that the dopamine for finishing the day's to do, even though you're only 1% more through the task as a result of that day.
Yeah, the project management and the setup on scope to quality and scope to time projects, it doesn't look radically different. You're going to put things in an order and watch them and make sure they're moving along, but they actually are quite different. A lot of times with scope to quality, you're searching for an aesthetic or a theory that is capable of being the highest caliber and quality early, and that's a lot of reading and a lot of thinking and a lot of discussions and a lot of experimentation. And it's if you're making a really think about Tesla, they put out the Cybertruck, what a weird cool thing. You've seen a Cybertruck, it's this crazy futuristic, this thing's nuts, right? I guarantee that wasn't the first rendition they did in the drawing pad. You know what I mean? They must have been looking at all kinds of sci-fi and spaceships and all kinds of stuff and drawing all kinds of stuff. And it's so their deliverable wasn't presumably, drawing by Friday, but it's we're not going to consider making a truck unless it's really uniquely badass and special and captures our ethos and captures the segment of the market and captures people's imagination that it otherwise wouldn't. And I would guess, yeah, you can say, and we want to, roll that out 9 months from now or at the next conference or whatever. Do you know what I mean? So you can have a time component on quality things as an outer bound. Do you know what I mean? Sure. It's not like they're exclusive, but they wouldn't just put out any truck. If they had a garbage Chevy truck looking very generic truck, but it's electric, they wouldn't have put it out at all.
And that actually, now that you mentioned it, that's an interesting comparison. Also, in the Blizzard EA comparison, Ford was EA and Tesla was Blizzard, right?
Correct.
Ford put out a new model year every year with some minor changes, and Tesla's we just ship the best car we can, and whenever we can update it and make it better, we do.
That's right.
So that's another interesting comparison.
That's right.
Okay, so you have changing tack a little bit. You've lived all over the world, right? I feel like last time we talked, you were somewhere in the Pacific, East Asia.
I don't know the last time we talked
region.
Sure, I've been. Yeah, sure. When I was 19, when I was 19, one of my dreams was to go to every country in the world. And this was people are probably listening to this now I was so hokey. This was really cool. This was really cool 2 decades ago, everybody. This is 2 decades ago. It was still kind of hard to do. Hey,
it's before Instagram travel blogs.
Oh, totally. Yeah. So I'm 38 now. So something I realized, by the way, it's a wild thing. I'm from the last generation of people that traveled without always on 3G internationally. Last. It'll never happen again. Even if you decide not to bring your phone, your your bus driver from the Cambodian border to the town is going to have a smartphone with 3G in it. Do you know what I mean? I'm the last generation of people that had like paper maps and didn't know where the hell you were going. If you get lost, you just figure it out, and it's kind of dangerous. Like the last generation, not me, but everybody, right, that did that. So the internet was just good enough that you could look up all this stuff. So you got Google Maps, but you didn't have Google Maps on your phone, right? So that was like the last generation. So there was a certain mystery and a novelty to it. As I got a little older, I realized that every country in the world kind of doesn't matter. This was like a vain kind of arbitrary thing, like passport stamps. Do you know what I mean? Like there are different provinces of China. Heck, there's different parts of the United States, I would say, that are more different than Belgium and France. Do you know what I mean? But they happen to be different countries because there's a line there and whatever. So, and I wasn't interested in passport stamps. I really liked seeing how people live in different places and really just immersing myself in different cultures. So I was somewhere where like I didn't really think it was worth going somewhere for less than a few weeks usually. Do you know what I mean? And ideally like 2 or 3 months and just kind of like slowly rotating through. Yeah, I would like swing through somewhere on the way to somewhere else and check it out, sure. But you know, by and large, I'd like to post up, you know, in a usually in a middle class, often a lower middle class and safe places neighborhood, because like you know, like wealthy fancy places are like the same everywhere. Do you know what I mean? They have like a little bit of local flavor. If you're in a wealthy place in the Middle East, they'll serve dates, and if you're in a wealthy place in a East Asian country, they'll have pu'er tea, but it's like the same. Like wealthy high-end design's the same everywhere, right? So it's a monoculture of sorts. Whereas like the lower middle class neighborhoods in different places, you know, a lower middle class Turkish neighborhood and a lower middle class Mongolian neighborhood are quite different, and people live quite differently, and it's quite interesting to see how people live.
Awesome. I mean, were you working that whole time, or were you just kind of traveling and seeing the world and being present where you were?
Yeah, I was lucky. I've been a high earner during various years of my life and did very well for myself. And I was always super frugal. Just spending money never really appealed to me on a personal level. I like having money so I could do projects, right? And now it's like at Ultraworking, it's like I was talking with our CTO the other day. You know, if I had you know X millions of dollars in my personal bank that I couldn't put into the company, you know, and I couldn't secondary stuff like hire more personal assistants and stuff like that, like just personal consumption, I wouldn't live any differently. Do you know what I mean? It would do like, you know, like whatever, more advanced expensive medicine stuff. Besides that, like I need clean food, a place that's like not too loud, good internet, good tools. That's all I need, right? So I was able to be, you know, do high earning periods and then just kind of mess around and do whatever. I've been working in consulting, and I've always been a put a lot of hours in guy when I'm not in a put no hours in sort of thing. I've been like doing, 60, 70 hours of consulting every week. And I realized I was like tightening the screws on stuff that already existed. I was like coming in and optimizing stuff that already existed. Right. And it was like great. I like the people that I work with. I like the work that I did. It was like totally fine. But I was kind of like, the world's not going to be any different as a result of me doing this. You know, you come in, you check out some process or whatever, and you're like, why don't we like tune this up here and here and here and here? And like it does, it's more efficient, whatever. Like that's great work. And I think I did good work. But I said I really want to make a difference and make the world run just a little bit better because I was here. And so I soft limited my consulting to 20 hours a week. Soft limited because I didn't bill hourly, I billed by project. So I had to kind of estimate, right? I soft limited, I'm only going to do 20 hours of consulting a week. And that's when I started doing writing projects. Charity stuff. I was a nonprofit, executive director, volunteer executive director of a nonprofit for a number of years. Education projects, science projects, collaborations with people, really cool stuff. By the way, you know what the crazy thing is? When you artificially limit the amount of hours you put in, my income went down, but not as much as I expected. Because I would say to somebody like, hey, Sebastian, I heard from so-and-so that you did a good job on this and that. Will you do that? I'm like, yeah, sorry, I'm not available right now. You're probably going to need that before March. And I think I'm booked up to March. It's like, yeah, what if we triple your rates? And I'm like, oh, shit, I wasn't charging enough. You know what I mean? But no, so my rates just went up really quickly. You know, I just reduced by reducing supply, and if the demand was the same, I guess this basic economics predicts this, but I didn't anticipate this in advance. So my rates went up, and I earned a little bit less, but not much less. And I had all this time to spend on these things that were really meaningful to me. And then eventually I went and started Ultraworking, and that's what I do now.
And what year was that you started Ultraworking?
This is a surprisingly interesting question because, like, we grabbed the URL and said we should do something in this space. I want to say in something like December 2016, but we didn't start until like 2018, like the end of 2018.
Okay.
kind of had other jobs and other
Interesting.
things going on.
And
right?
was there? Yeah. It seems like what seemed a little bit like it emerged from this epic writing sprint that you did, and I want to kind of go back to that question of like what were you like going into and coming out of that sort of big writing thing? Did that help you codify ideas? Did it change things? Did it enlighten you? Like that feels like a really interesting experiment. I'm just curious sort of how that felt from the inside.
Yeah, I went through two primary, probably other ones, but let's say two primary writing eras in my life. The first one was, I remember one day I said, I really like writing and I'd like to do it. And this is back when like blogging was cool and the internet was cool and like social media wasn't a thing yet, really, or like maybe early social media, but like as a modern thing, it wasn't a thing. Mm-hmm. So, back then, like, blogs were really cool, and there's, like, the blogosphere, and people had blog rolls and blog link each other, and whatever. It's, like, a different world. Like, there's maybe some young guy, some young gal listening to this who's like, oh, what are they talking about? I've got my TikTok thing where it's, like, just beaming, like insanity into my eyes and just destroying my neocortex. I don't know, these blogosphere blog. But back then, yeah, it was a little bit different back then, but I blogged. I wrote a blog post every single day for, I don't know, 2-3 years in a row, something like that. So I just did a few years in a row. I'm going to write something every single day, and some of them were good. And so you just get some incremental improvement. There was no targeted direction. There was nothing to it. There was no whatever. And I think a lot of the quality was more missed than hit in retrospect, but it hit enough, and it was always decent. I was trying to make interesting stuff. Well, okay, so I said, okay, I did enough of that. Let me think about this. Took some time away from it. And I said, what would me as a really, really good writer look like? And I really, really, really sat and thought about it. Like, what would me as a leveled up writer look like where I was doing really, really, really special, really, really good work? And I went and I studied great writing, and I went and I looked at really some of the classics in writing. My favorite book of literary criticism is On the Sublime by Longinus, 300 AD work. Looking at what great writing is, and there's modern versions of that, and reading a lot of authors. I also study the mechanics of writing a lot. There's a great chapter in a book, I hate the title. The title's Extreme Productivity by Bob Posen. He's a Harvard professor and a finance guy and a lawyer and does a bunch of stuff. He has a chapter on writing and writing mechanics. It's extremely valuable, extremely, extremely valuable, where he says to break writing into different stages of brainstorming, outlining, writing, and editing as separate stages. I also had research, so I had a fifth stage, and you don't separate them. So I always recommend that chapter. It's like chapter 6 or 7 of that book to people that want to become a mechanics writer that don't rely on inspiration. So I retrained myself to write in that style from an inspiration writer, and I also studied the poetics and really tried to level up on it. After that, I committed to writing a approximately 6,000 word essay. Some of them were shorter, some of them were longer, every single week. And I did this again every single week for 2 or 3 years, which was, about right for me. And what I did before I started on this, and this is something I definitely recommend to any person that's already busy with creative, that wants to get a creative project thing going in their life. If someone's like really young, if like there's any 18-year-olds listening, maybe just get going, because just put something out there and see what happens. But if someone's got established, they're in business, they got a career or whatever. I built a backlog of, I forget whether it was like 6 issues or 10 issues of essays, right? I think it was like 6. I had a backlog of 6 essays before I put the first one out. So that meant that I didn't have to write one a week to publish one a week, right? I had to write 6 in 6 weeks before the backlog ran out. And I try to do one a week, but hey, every now and then there's a great opportunity or something happens, right? And then my backlog gets down to 4, and I would just try to fill it back up to 6, and sometimes even a little more, to get even more ahead of schedule, right? And so I was always 6 weeks ahead of schedule. I had a friend that worked at Apple, and at least some years ago, I think they were on the iPhone 3, maybe. He said, in the lab right now, they have the iPhone 5. Right? So Apple's always multiple iPhones ahead. Do you know what I mean? They're not like 2 months away from the next iPhone version number. Like, oh, what are we going to do, guys? Like, we got to move. You know what I mean? So having a backlog.
Yeah, this is back to that example you gave about the term paper.
Yeah. Well, so you avoid that. Yeah. But here's the thing. The term paper thing is fine to do acutely, but not chronically. Chronically, that'll ruin your life. Do you know what I mean? So the term paper thing, right? Let's put ourselves under massive stress to ship something. That's a great idea. That's a great idea to do occasionally to learn about yourself, or because a big opportunity comes up, or hey, it's a crisis, just back up and deal with it, right? But you don't want to acutely be in a crisis every freaking Thursday when your essay's coming out, You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
So I built the backlog. To the question of how did it affect me and influence me, man, reality is really interesting and it's really complex. I think that's the biggest thing I got from it. And I know that's not going to be very useful for anybody else listening, but just getting an appreciation for all the nuances and depth and intensity of reality, and kind of clarifying where you stand on some things, as well. So you asked about that, and it certainly did. But as well as just getting an understanding, because when you try to explain why something happens, like why did World War I happen? Do you know what I mean? And you actually try to write it out, not give the, nationalism and blah, blah, blah. And then there was the Belgium and the treaty and the mobilization. No. Right? Like, it's really, really complex. You know, it's really, really complex why World War I started. Do you know what I mean? And why did it start then and not earlier or later? Do you know what I mean? And why did it go the full intensity why it did? And why did Turkey get in? You know, Winston Churchill, by the way, the reason Turkey got in is Winston Churchill was a Lord of the Admiralty. He confiscated 2 Turkish battleships that they had paid England and fully paid. These battleships, World War I broke out. They said, we need them in the war effort. They confiscated them. And they really insulted the Turks as well. He didn't say, we'll pay for them. We're so sorry, whatever. He's like, we don't know if we'll pay you. Her Majesty's government will follow up with you. They declared war on England. And then that brought down the Ottoman Empire. So, like, not a good move. But, like, super, super complex. And you look at that and how the personality of Churchill and the Turkish envoys, and the different factions in Turkey and blah, blah, blah. You know, so getting an appreciation for the complexity and like the kind of hidden levers of reality. When people try to transmit lessons, they try to transmit simple, timeless lessons because those can be transmitted, right? You know, you could like, okay, here's how to focus on something. Here's how to do service. Here's what great operations look like. But when you actually get into it in any sort of business, there's thousands of levers. We were analyzing recently. We think there's probably like something like 7,000 nodes. If we were to graph everything that happens in Ultraworking, there's probably like 7,000 nodes on a graph, you know, of like interactions. We've been like doing some systems maps and stuff internally to improve some stuff. There's probably like 7,000 little individual interactions of like, you know, this API call at this time or this analytics getting stored there and such like that, to that granular level, right? And reality has a lot of depth and a lot of nuance, and I feel like a lot of people don't engage with that. I feel like CEOs engage with that. But I think the writing was really me engaging with and getting exposure to the nuances of, you know, whatever, like the Russian Civil War, or, you know, like George Washington and Braddock's expedition and why they got the hell kicked out of them. I feel like that's the biggest thing, is it gave me an appreciation for all the complexity and depth of reality.
It's so funny that my episode with Taylor Pearson, he said something very similar that it's always stuck with me, that I think is an original Taylorism. He always says reality has a surprising amount of detail. And that's like, his path there was always through like studying financial crises and the finance systems and why they're necessary. Like all of these things that you just keep unpacking nuance and nuance and nuance. And you find that if you really, really want to understand something, it requires understanding a shocking number of details of almost anything. And you can go down all those rabbit holes. But, and that's that is an obvious, but I think profound point. It's like, that gives you empathy over anybody who's trying to accomplish anything, because trying to accomplish anything is hard, and you have to really have a lot of mastery to do anything with high intention, and have it be successful because of all those details.
What's crazy to me and what's terrifying to me, it's crazy and it's terrifying, right? So I think almost all of the story I'm about to say is public knowledge. So I'm not sharing no private knowledge. We launched Clockwork Nutrition on Product Hunt, right? Product Hunt's a great website where you can discover new things. It's really cool. And Ryan Hoover, the founder of Product Hunt, a really admirable guy, really amazing guy, he commented on it like, oh, hey, this looks really cool. This is neat, something like that, right? And at first we thought like, oh, okay, it's his site. He's just going and commenting on things. We looked, he had only commented on like 3 things in the last like months. Do you know what I mean? He hadn't been active. So I shot him an email. And I was like, hey, do you want to try out Clockwork Nutrition? We'll do it on the house, no obligation. You know, you could say you hate it. If you like it, I'd be delighted if you say like it. If you don't, if neither, you don't even have to do anything. Really, no strings attached. You just, a guy I like, I use Product Hunt, it's been great for us, whatever. And so he did. We set him up, we hooked him up. You know, cost us, we got cost of goods sold on that, so it cost us, some hundreds of dollars. But he did it, and then he tweeted out, that he liked it, and that was really neat. And the math on it's kind of funny. when you see the world mathematically, you see the math behind everything, even if something's primarily like social and appreciative and stuff like that, right? So it's like, I just appreciate him, and I'm just so grateful to him. But also, mathematically, tens of thousands of dollars of value, right? You know what I mean? And
yeah, that's awesome.
And I get to meet and socialize with this guy who's a really admirable guy, a really amazing guy. Well, here's the thing. I might have not noticed that. That was one email, one hour call, one judgment call. And then I asked a couple team members to set up the ops around that and to waive the fees and whatnot. And okay, that's a one-off thing that, again, noticing something, which takes 1 second of noticing, following up, which takes an email, which took 3 minutes, right? Then a 1 hour phone call and then a 1 hour follow-up. And the team handle the rest of it. Well, here's what scares me. I think there's things like that all over the place, first. Second, I think there's operational and systemic things where you change from like a push system to a pull system on something, or you change a little bit how you do project management, or a little bit, about like how you do design, or like, maybe the whole magic behind Amazon was their press release style thing where they have to write a press release before a product, and how that subtly shapes the whole product development process. I'm nearly certain, I am certain that in a lot of organizations, including ours, there are little things that you flip one switch or you implement one thing, and like the magnitudes are just so much higher. So I'm trying to simultaneously do a really, really good job on the day-to-day, and a really, really good job of keeping the big picture in mind, and like making amazing things for customers, getting great new people to hear about us and become customers, and make the best team in the world and give them training and development. And I'm also just trying to like keep my eyes out for like, there's just random magic that on the same level of effort, we're going to get double to an order of magnitude more results if we just flip this one switch or connect this one thing. And it's inspiring, but it's also like terrifying. It's like, what are we missing? There must be more things like this. And like, how many of these are we overlooking? And how many of these do we flip? And history gives you a bunch of examples and analogs of people doing a very interesting thing. It used to be that in the military, you'd always have the rear of your military, and then you had the front. In the front, the vanguard was really good, and the rear guard was, sometimes the rear guard itself was okay, but sometimes not, as the rear mostly not. And you had your flanks, which were like okay, but like not the best. People right on the flanks were okay, and they'd try to flank them. Well, Napoleon was like, hey, forget that. We're not going to have a front or a back. Any of the four sides of our square-like military can become the front. We could just change direction without having the front reorient around. That's why one of the reasons they were so mobile. So he put good enough troops that were vanguard quality on all four of the sides of every square of his military, so they could just change direction without a long hike around and then reassembling. So, and you couldn't really flank them. You know what I mean? It wasn't that the good guys in the front aren't there if you got on their flank. They just turn, and then the west, you were fighting the west side, is now the front. Of the thing, and those guys are also really good. So Napoleon redistributed his best guys from the front to a little bit the side, a little bit the back, and made it so that anybody was comfortable communicating and leading of what's our orientation direction, going west, east, north, or south. And then it's like, okay, cool. When we're going north, you're in the vanguard. When we're going west, you're the flank. When we're going south, you're the rear guard. Done. Huge maneuverability. And it's like you change that was one of the things that made them win so many of the battles. In Napoleonic Wars. Just that made them so much faster and so much better, and you couldn't really surprise them that badly and roll them up. And they could surprise you. They could just turn and start screwing you up, even if you flank them. Like, we got an edge. No, you don't. Right? So that little difference, which is kind of simple, but was like against 1,000 years of military doctrine at that point,
Yeah, that's amazing. That's such a simple thing. I haven't heard that story before. It sounds to like my a bunch of my pseudo military education was just like reading Ender's Game, because Orson Scott Card is like pretty well read in that, and it is eerily similar. I know it's fiction, but it's just like one or two really simple. Hey, I'm going to have a much more flexible, slightly differently subdivided army, and we're going to have we're going to change our orientation. Like very simple things, well applied, can be incredibly impactful on your business and your military, your life. I like the hunt for those too, because those are, cheap, right? they're hard to find, but they're cheap to implement.
The expenses in finding
ideas
them,
like that.
And then sometimes it's a lot of work to install them and get people, if they're counterintuitive, and get people comfortable, with the new way of doing things.
Yeah, probably social cost is probably the main.
That's right. And so you got to give it more time.
As we like. Yeah. Yeah. And the bigger the organization, the more time. So I've got an idea to run by you that I would just kind of like your reaction on, and then a closing question for you as we kind of wind down. Naval has this idea. I think he tweeted it, and it's definitely open to interpretation. I'm going to guess you have a different take, and I'm just kind of interested to hear your riff on it, but it always stuck with me. Self-measurement is self-punishment. Agree or disagree?
What's the context?
A tweet. So not a lot of context, but like as somebody who has both self-measured and aggressively not, I think it's an interesting thing. And I mean, you have done chapters, it sounds like, of both. I'm just curious.
Yeah. So, I mean, to get my linguistics hat on, you could mean measure a couple of different ways. Like, are you measuring yourself against a standard, or are you just taking data, snapshots, right? And punishment sounds negative at first, but, Nietzsche has this famous thing, whoever wants to jubilate up to the heavens, must be prepared for grief unto death. Do you know what I mean? Because you will see that you fall short when you measure, and you will see all the places that you screwed up, and it will illuminate those. So there might be a little bit of a hidden counterintuitive wisdom where he's like, the self-punishment's not necessarily bad. I don't know exactly what he meant. I doubt that, but maybe, right? My favorite quote was written by the greatest swordsman in Japanese history, Miyamoto Musashi. He wrote his deathbed testimony. It's called the Dakota. And it's just a bunch of like one-sentence principles. I think it's number 3. Number 4 is my favorite quote of all time. Think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world. Think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world. So when I take measurements, this is something that I have to constantly remind myself of, because I know I'm different than other people, and sometimes I ignore it and to my own peril. I don't compare myself to other people, and like I don't feel really bad when something doesn't go the way I want it to go if I just like did what I could. Sometimes someone screws something up and they're just like, I hate myself, and I'm just kind of like, The question I was asking myself is, at the skill level and knowledge level I had when I made those decisions and executed that way, could I have known better? If the answer was no, I don't feel bad at all. 0. Right? And anything short of being really negligent, do you know what I mean? I'm like, data. Let's fix it. Do you know what I mean? So for me, it's kind of like if you track how much iron you're pumping in the gym, that measurement, you know what I mean? It's not, I'm a strong man. Oh no, today I'm a weak man. It's just like, okay, like whatever. It's just data. Let's make those weights go up, and let's keep other data on, like, make sure we're healthy and not get injured. So tentatively, to the colloquial definition, I tentatively disagree. But that worries me, because Naval's such a smart guy. So whenever somebody so smart says something that I don't agree with, I'd be very willing to learn more and explore. Maybe he's on to something there. Maybe he means something a little subtle.
Well, he's got enough of a philosophical bent that sometimes he's very much optimizing for happiness or state of mind or something. And I imagine this to come from the sort of the philosophical with inner peace as much more the goal than an operating principle within a company. Though, to your point, like, there are times when, that observation that I am or am not falling short, and the need for a feedback loop is a really important one. So I just think it's interesting, for to drop that observation into the middle of a bunch of people who are obsessively measuring everything.
Totally.
I think is pretty interesting. It is probably at least sometimes the basis for self-punishment. But it doesn't have to be, to your point. And I've heard you interviewed a bunch of times where you are really thoughtful, I think, about, like, that experiment did not go as intended, or I failed, but that's okay. And, like, I'll try something different, or I'll try something again.
The other thing is, I think there's sometimes in life, and I'm a very big believer in this, where you want to do something for a qualitative or philosophical reason. You think it's the right thing to do. And, like, you're like, I'm doing this, and I don't care what the numbers show or the data shows. I'm, like, philosophically committed or aesthetically committed to this. And I'm very willing to do that. And sometimes people are like, hey, let's track, let's measure. I'm like, no, we're doing this the artistic way, and I'm, like, very strong. Like, you could force me to give my case and analysis and logic as to why it might pay off, but you can't talk me out of this. I'm doing it because it's really good. Do you know what I mean? So, there's people that like study all the industry trends and music and then make a song that sounds like all of them. And there's people that are like, I'm doing this weird thing and people might not like it, and they persist for years, and they're the ones that create trends. So I think there is something to be said about if you're doing something really unique or something special to you, that maybe you could use data to refine your approach, but maybe you don't want to, and you want to be on more of a qualitative basis. And that might even be on just a feeling or an intuition. I'm not against perception, intuition. I'm actually very big believers in those as well. So I think you need to know what's the right tool for the job, what's called for in the situation, and what you want.
Yeah, that's something I admire about you, actually. I think, there's, you are definitely an outlier in how the precision and sort of effort that you put into some of the quantitative measurements, but it does not blind you to the impact of intangibles or unmeasurables or whatever. Like that seems to almost get equal weight with you, even though you take the quantitative to an extreme. And something else that I forgot about this until just now. You stuck in my brain years ago. I can't even remember how long it was. You were doing, I think you were talking about your monthly planning, and like you pick a theme or a topic or like a discipline. You have like a tagline for a month or some period of time that you stick with. And I think for some of the particularly extreme ones, you even you talked about like altering your physical appearance or your environment.
Sure. Yeah, get a haircut or change your furniture around a little bit or put painting up. Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, to like reinforce that theme. I think this one, the one that I remember, I think you like were in a hardcore like operational or like output mode, and you like shaved your head, and you were like, every morning when I look in the mirror, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm in beast mode. Like, totally. Here we go. Like, no extraneous anything.
Yeah, and you could go get more like ornamental clothing, or you could go, dress a little more like, old school mechanic and overall style. Yeah, changing your physical appearance so you look different in the mirror is a great way when you're doing a discontinuous break and you want to have a bit of an identity shift or be deep on something. Yeah, it's really, really good and cheap to do that. So yeah, I'll do that. To the qualitative point, I mean, if I had to choose between all my quantitative skills and qualitative skills, I'd choose the qualitative skills. You know what I mean? It's like, where do I think the world's going? What do people need? How do we do something really special? You can put rubrics and frameworks and stuff around these a little bit to help you think about them, but at the end of the day, it's very qualitative. But then, around the edges, you put down some kind of, there's a reason they have timetables at train stations, and you know when the train's going to leave, and the train doesn't leave when the conductor feels like it should leave, and right? Like, there's a reason they do that, which is that it works better, right? So you do that stuff too, so that I have this beautiful idea. We'll put metal rails on the ground with wooden ties and steam engine machines to carry people and livestock and materials from city to city. And then it's like, okay, let's put together a timetable of how often this magical thing happens. A steam engine, it's like amazing, right? And then like timetables and like maintenance schedules and stuff like that. And the same ones for you with personal stuff, your monthly planning, and you do habit stuff like lights, and maybe some time tracking if you want to optimize that so that you can make all the magic happen. But yeah, I mean, you couldn't have derived, I presume, the steam engine from a pure quantitative, certainly not at that time. You know what I mean? A lot of the magic comes from a qualitative. But then, you go quantitative, objective, and whatever to make things actually happen reliably and into a higher standard and magnitude, right? Yeah,
I think that's the pattern over and over again. Is I think I was reading this in the beginning of Infinity, like the theory almost always, which in this analogy is qualitative, almost always comes before the invention, and then the quantitative comes in to sort of either optimize or explain the invention that sprung from the theory that the tinker sort of made happen. So last question here, and take your time with it. What is the mental model or heuristic that you find yourself applying the most often?
The most often? I like to come back to service focus over and over and over and over again, right? And I try to really pleasantly, politely, lovingly drill this into our team. A lot of people, when they do things, they're doing the thing because they said they're doing the thing, or they're getting paid to do the thing, or whatever. And they're not like, at the end of the day, this needs to serve people in some way. And that person might be yourself. right? Do you know what I mean? So like, some people like, it's funny, right? If you're like in a good workout practice, I do yoga twice a week, one-on-one, virtually over the video conferencing. I'm not like, oh, I have to do yoga. I'm like, okay, cool. It's yoga. I like it. It's part of my routine, right? But sometimes when you're first getting into something, you're like, oh man, maybe I should make myself go to do yoga or whatever. Maybe I should make myself go to the gym when it's new, right? Just reminding yourself, it's not like I have to go to the gym. It's like, hey, cool. I'm building up my muscles, I'm building up my longevity, I'm going to feel good afterwards, and coming back to like why you're doing things and then optimizing those things, or optimizing. I don't think about optimizing all the time, which is what we're talking about today. Doing things for that reason. Good writers versus bad writers. Good writers are thinking about the audience. How do I make this useful for the audience? How, like what does the audience need to know? People that write standard operating procedures, there's like two types of operating procedures. There's ones that are written by people that are really like empathetic and thoughtful, right? That are like, all right, a new person's looking at this like, hey, and I'm going to shoot a little 2-minute explainer video on this one because it's like really tricky. Like, hey, this is tricky. Don't sweat it, but make sure you click this button, but not that button. You'll hit X and it'll clear all your work. It's like an old bank system. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's really thoughtful, empathetic people that write SOPs, and they're great. And there's SOPs that are freaking garbage. Like, you know what I mean? Right? So coming back over and over and over again, like, oh, I have to write an SOP for this thing. It's going to be terrible. If you're like, another human is going to use this, and I'm trying to make their life easy, I'm trying to connect with them, I can put a couple little jokes in there. I can make it stylish a little bit. I can put a fun quote in there. When you remember that the vast majority of things you do, you're doing for somebody else. Do you know what I mean? Or for yourself. There's like a reason you're doing things, and coming back to what is that reason and making sure I hit that reason, not do the stuff that's on the to-do list. That's probably the most important one for me, service focus.
I like that a lot. And I had never considered it in service of your future self. But I think that's super, super important. And I like it. Thank you for that answer, and
what's
for taking your time with it.
Maybe you've talked about it on a past podcast that I haven't heard. What's yours?
The thing probably in this chapter of life, it is leverage. I'm I think making the transition from how do I squeeze my fruit the hardest to get the most juice out of it to how do I best sort of gather and apply the resources that I have around me to increase my impact. And achieve the desired outcome for me and the people around me. And I think that also it is an intense and hard work mode, but it is a really good mix to me of like the judgment that we talked about, but the intensity of the sort of individual contributor work period. But it sets up this sort of life mode where you can still be really high impact without being incredibly optimized from a like productivity perspective.
From the other meaning of productivity, I think I'm
right. Yeah. Like I believe that after a chapter of this, I will be able to sort of have equivalent or increasing or ever increasing sort of compounding impact and outcomes without having to scale effort linearly.
Well, because you can't
continue to do that or even sustain
hours
it.
a week. Because once you, and it is super valuable. A lot of the things that we do are to help, individuals scale up their performance, and that's really needed when you're in your 20s and you're getting your game going, right? And then increasingly we bring out stuff like Clockwork of like, hey, we'll just eliminate this whole area, all nutrition, all food prep, all planning. We're like, like we roll out stuff like
Clockwork
that.
was such a
more senior people. Like that one,
Clockwork's an awesome idea. I was actually working on, I was fiddling with this idea also because I had been through, like the previous year I had been through the like, all right, I'm going to hire a trainer who's going to like program my meals down to the calorie and like all the workouts and all the everything. And I was like, oh, okay, like I understand this architecture now. And so I was doing it actually the full stack for a friend of mine who was like obsessively down a rabbit hole about something else, but was having like some health challenges. And so I was like, all right, I'll program your meals. I'll do all the shopping. I'll do all this stuff. I'm just going to get it delivered to your house and have it be like, I discovered that if he would eat the food that was in his house, he would follow the path of least resistance. So if you could get the right food into his house, he would eat healthy and be good and be happy and more productive. And so I was like messing with how to productize this. And then I saw Clockwork Nutrition come out with like a very different approach, but it was so interesting. I was like, oh,
no,
this
it's
is
the same. No, it's literally the same. It's just that we just used meal delivery services instead of
groceries.
Instead of groceries.
Yeah. which is also
which is only
smart. So yeah, I
recently.
Now, it makes it an even better product. But I think I need to give it a try. Actually, I haven't had like the right life circumstance to try it.
But hey, I love where you're going because that is the iteration. Is you start by not maximizing, but doing really well on your individual performance. Then when you have some resources, you get rid of some domains. Again, you get some help, whether that's personal trainer or medical or an assistant or whatever. And then if you really want to have impact, then it's teams and it's systems, and to some extent it is a lot of qualitative and theory, and the job becomes a lot of thinking and good judgment and relationships and really thinking about and designing things. And it's very interesting how that shifts over time. So yeah, that's really cool. Hey, let's do this again sometime. This was great. Thank you for running me down and saying, hey, Sebastian, you got to be on this show. This is amazing. So thank you so much, Eric. This was great.
Yeah, I'm like I said, I'm a big fan. I'm excited to sort of introduce you and Ultraworking to a bunch of other people that I hope get as much value out of it as I have. Especially, in the world of like working indie, really helps to have some rails and some frameworks. And you guys have put a ton of work into these. I've always found them really helpful, and it's good to get to know a little bit more the mind behind the software.
Hey, much appreciated, man. Thank you so much. And
cool.
The feeling is very mutual. We gotta do it again sometime. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Yeah, let's talk soon. All right.
All right. Be well.